Thank you very much. First, let me thank you, Congresswoman Donna Edwards, first of all, just for your long time and steady support and work on behalf of so many issues relating to women, especially those as it relates to violence against women. You have consistently, over the years, done this work oftentimes when no one else was doing it, and thank you for staying the course. It's so important that we come together again in a bipartisan way to get the right bill, the correct bill passed, and so thank you very much. And I want to thank Congressman Garamendi for your leadership in helping to put together the special order, but also for your leadership on behalf of women all around the world. I know your wife very well and your children, and you have always really stood on the side of what was right for equity and for justice as it relates to women. So thank you very much. I believe that we all can agree that there really is an acute need to put an end to domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual harassment. It's critical that we continue to speak out against intimate partner violence at every opportunity and call attention and awareness to it whenever we can. And so that's why we've got to really get this bill back in the shape that it needs to be in so that we can protect women. Because I can remember when I was in the California legislature, for example, I wrote the Californians Violence Against Women's Act for the state of California, worked on many domestic violence bills that were signed into law, mind you, by then Governor Pete Wilson, a Republican governor, and of course continued to co-sponsor and work on numerous bills here and now in Congress to support victims of domestic violence and to prevent domestic violence. Now, as someone who understands domestic violence on a deeply personal level, I know how traumatic this experience is. I know that the strong and consistent support system needed to emerge as a survivor. Now, there was no Violence Against Women Act in the late 60s and early 70s when I had to deal with many, many issues that we're talking about tonight. There was no place to turn. And I also know from personal experience that domestic violence is not only physical, it's emotional. It is brutal. It is dehumanizing to the batterer and, yes, the battered. And without strong and enforceable criminal laws and services in place, one's life really can be shattered and destroyed. Unfortunately, instead of being serious about the federal reauthorization of VAWA, Republicans are attempting to roll back current law and weaken protections for women. This bill, H.R. 4970, would further marginalize LGBT victims, tribal victims, and immigrant victims by removing the limited but important protections that the Senate version extends to LGBT domestic violence victims, including key non-discrimination provisions. Those are essential. Removing the common sense and constitutionally sound provisions in the Senate version that will allow the prosecution of non-tribal violators who commit domestic violence against tribal women. This is horrible. It's wrong. It's immoral. Under this bill, the protection of immigrant victims would be subject to unsubstantiated, abuser-provided evidence, among other bureaucratic barriers to protection, including delays in the prosecution of abusers. Now, without changes and rollbacks like these, and these are only a few of them, I question really if the Republican proposal should even be called a Violence Against Women Act. I understand that Congresswoman Adams' amendment would make some small changes to this bill. However, it would still roll back key protections for immigrant victims, allowing the abuser to have the power during investigations and to maintain control of the victim's immigration status. Under the guise of fraud concerns, Republicans are attempting to roll back important protections, even as the Department of Homeland Security officials say that VAWA petitions are among the hardest immigrant programs to defraud because of the already high evidence requirements. Now, our colleagues in the Senate recognize the need to modernize and expand protections for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence. On April 26, the Senate versions of the Violence Against Women's Reauthorization Act passed with a rare show of bipartisan support, and that is what we are here to say we should do today and tomorrow in this House. In this bill, though, that the House is considering, this would really pose a serious threat to the lives of victims. And this is happening while all around the world, nearly 1 in 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. 1 in 3. Here in the United States, as many as 1 in 3 American women report being physically or sexually abused by a husband or a boyfriend at least once in their lives. That's shocking. In my home state of California, the statistics are even more staggering, where approximately 40% of California women experience physical, intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. Of these women, 3 out of 4 had children under the age of 18 at home. Children who see or experience domestic violence have a much greater chance to become either victims or perpetrators as adults. They are also more likely to attempt suicide, abuse drugs, run away from home, engage in teenage prostitution, and commit other crimes. So there is unquestionable evidence of the need for a serious proposal to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. So I urge my colleagues to pass the Senate's Violence Against Women's Authorization Act. We cannot afford to play political games with women's lives. We must not go back to the days, which many of us remember, where there were no protections, no safe places, where the courts would not allow battered women syndrome as admissible evidence in court, and women were incarcerated for defending themselves against their abusers. So I have to thank Congresswoman Edwards again for your tremendous leadership in bringing us all together and continuing to try to work in a way that's in a bipartisan fashion, because that's the only way we can do this on behalf of all women. This really is, in many ways, about life and death. Thank you again.